Hasn't been a great week or two for the AFL. Two botched tribunal hearings involving at VFL level Lance Collard, at AFL level Zach Butters. We've got the ongoing Elijah Hollands issue. We might start with Lance Collard, given that is the most recent finding just handed down in the last 24 or 36 hours.
So St Kilda and the Players Association, along with the AFL, have come out with strong statements. I've spoken this morning with the St Kilda CEO, Carlton, who is in Fiji with the AFLW team on a community trip. They have a big relationship with the Fijian government. Carlton has seen fit, the St Kilda boss, to talk again with his AFLW players and assure them that the decision to appeal Lance's suspension was in no way an accepting of homophobic language, and that St Kilda remain aghast that such language still takes place on the footy field. So that's the one side. The AFL management of this, Bruce, and you have to look at Greg Swan, who came in to oversee the tribunal and the judicial system. You have to look at Stephen Mead, the AFL legal counsel, once on the executive, no longer, but demoted last year, but still very much in charge of the legal situation there at the AFL. This is embarrassing for them. I'm also embarrassed for the AFL communications team because, Bruce, on Thursday night, when this story broke, the AFL put out a statement. The statement came out when the game had already started, the Thursday night footy game. The AFL acknowledges the decision of the appeals board, it goes on to say, but they put a full stop on the matter. Mr Collard's sanction was reduced to a suspension of 4 weeks, of which 2 weeks of suspension until the end of the season to be served simultaneously. The matter is otherwise at a close, and it goes on to reiterate its lack of tolerance for homophobic language.
And finishes with, we thank all parties involved for their cooperation in this process.
Now, you know when a second press release comes out, within 24 hours, there's been a stuff-up. And how did they read this so wrongly, the AFL, on the Thursday night? Did they think they were putting out the trash when they put out that statement when the footy had started? Because by the next morning, and we were hearing from community leaders, we were hearing from AFLW leaders and former players and commentators like Kate McCarthy, who was very strong about what Will Horton, the appeals board tribunal chairman, had said, and basically saying you just have to accept that the pressures of the game mean that these things happen: homophobia, racism, and sexism. Now, how did the AFL and their crack communications team, which last year brought in Sharon McCrone as a new executive who's worked with the highest levels of government across the country, think that was acceptable and put out a statement that they did on the Thursday night? As James Gallagher, the new players boss, said, everyone has been shattered by this. Lance Collard has been smashed privately and on social media. He has denied he made the comment, but the tribunal basically hasn't believed him. They've reduced his penalty not on a point of law, really, which was what St Kilda argued. St Kilda made no argument that it was acceptable, this language. So St Kilda are now having to make deep and meaningful explanations to the gay community and the wider LGBTQI plus community. It is a monumental mistake. The legal team behind St Kilda are angry. Will Horton the retired Will Horton can no longer serve on this appeals board, in my view, Bruce, if this is the way he feels. And the two heavy legal minds who served alongside him, they must be furious. They can't have gone along with this. So, but what really
So how could that happen? If the two other people are on the appeals board, they just disappear once the written report comes out?
Well, unless people who know the other two say to me they find it difficult to believe. Mind you, they were shocked by what Will Horton said too. But the AFL's management of this, Andrew Dillon's statement that came out around 3 o'clock yesterday was strong and appropriate. And I wonder if they could have even done more and gone back again, made them go back again. What happened with Zach Butters was that it was also embarrassing. They didn't even bother to rehear it again. They just said, look, We've stuffed it up, so let's end it.
About the systems before the specifics of the two cases, but I remember I did an injection about a month ago on the pace of it. I could never understand.
You did?
Why the people who run the game, which is the AFL Commission, the AFL executive, they make the rules and then they should enforce the rules and they do it through the match review process and then they hand it. I call them part-time. That's disrespectful. But they're people who are not part of the AFL decision-making body, or are they? They should be, like the Tribunal and then the Appeals Board. They should know, they're there, aren't they, am I mistaken, to enforce the AFL rules, not to make them up along the way. And it would appear this Appeals Board is so different than what the AFL rule interpretations are. You think, how's someone gone down that path? So you mentioned the names. I reckon the hope is that the Craig Drummonds, Greg Swan's only been their member for under a year, and Tom Harley, the new people might say, this is the best system of running the judiciary of the AFL, the current one. Because at the moment, as I say, they're having the full-timers who make the decisions, who then make a call through the match review process, hand it to people who are part-time AFL people, if you know what I mean.
Well, are we moving into the area now where there's going to be a complete overhaul of the judiciary at the end of the season?
Absolutely, no doubt. The Players Association have come out and said it has to happen. Everyone agrees. Well, St Kilda believe that this should have been mediated in the first place. Port Adelaide say they pushed for mediation with the Zach Butters, and that was a completely different situation, I know, but it was a botched off-field legal situation. So there's a similarity. The AFL says that Port Adelaide weren't prepared to mediate under certain circumstances. I think the umpire was so angry by what took place, Nick Foote, that he wouldn't mediate unless a penalty stood. So I can't get a straight answer out of anyone there, but someone should have been strong enough to make them mediate. Just force the mediation.
Tell me, before we get off what's happened at the Appeals Board and Lance Collar.
Yep, sorry.
Is this the kind of thing the Commission should intervene and come over the top of the Appeals Board and say that was so far from what the game is expecting and wanting, because it was so far away from what was the expectation, I would have thought, for most people. Now, you either find him not guilty, that's different. But you found him guilty and giving him a penalty that seemed so under what other people were getting for similar type stuff. Is that where the Commission should intervene?
Well, Craig Drummond has come in, and one of his platforms has been inclusion, that we need to do so much more to welcome minority groups into the game. This is where the game's future is. This is where Australia's future is, where Australia's game. Where's he in all of this? Now, surely behind the scenes he's horrified.
You have to be.
But as I said, did Andrew Dillon know that statement was going out? Are those statements after such a monumental...
statement from the Appeals Board, you mean?
Yeah, no, the AFL statement
AFL
that
statement
said they were putting a full stop on it before going back, after they got the community and really footy backlash as well, when they decided to have another crack.
Well, back to your point, Lee, you could count on one hand how many times have the AFL Commission intervened in the modern era. I can only think of 3 instances: stripping Joe Watson of his Brownlow medal, kicking Essendon out of the finals and changing the result in the St Kilda Fremantle game, Siren Gate in Launceston, which is 20 years ago. They're the only 3 cases. So it is an absolute rarity.
But this seems like an extreme example of where a body that the game employs, I mean, the AFL employed the Tribunal members, employ the Appeals Board members, but they've gone completely against what is the AFL's policies, all the things that...
Well,
if ever there's a case for the Commission to intervene, it'd be now.
You concluded when you made your points a few weeks ago that maybe it's for fear of legal retribution.
Well, I think the reason the current system exists is to prevent a whole lot of litigation, right? So you say, if a club doesn't like what's happened to one of their players, you say, you've had the match review, you've had the Tribunal, you've had the Appeals Board, that's enough to say that you don't need to go to court.
This just in. The AFL advises that it has terminated the appointment of Will Horton KC as chair of the AFL Appeals Board effective immediately. They talk about his contribution, etc., etc. Now, the other 2 Appeals Board members were Georgina Coughlin, and she's a KC, and the former player, now barrister, Stephen Jurica. I'm sure we will be hearing, someone will talk to those 2 over the next couple of days, and I hope they distance themselves, and I hope that we learn that they didn't know that Will Horton wasn't going to say what he said.
Well, that's even worse. I mean, it's just been like we think we're a full-time professional sport, and what happened at the tribunal? The only thing I only realised, Caro, recently, is that the last time I had anything to do with the tribunal, the 2 or 3 members of the tribunal were there. Everyone was in the same room, but apparently during COVID, when you couldn't be in the same room. Wouldn't you
bad habits crept in?
Wouldn't you think it's mandatory that at least the 3 people on the tribunal or on the appeals are together?
1,000%.
Even if the people who are given evidence and giving, even the KCs who are the advocates, maybe they can do it remotely. But the 3, because the discussion about the verdict, you know what it's like when you're trying to have discussions over Zoom or Teams. I mean, it's a very poor medium to discuss. So surely that has to change.
No doubt. We could keep discussing. We could probably fill up the entire preview with the...
Just say again, who let that statement go through on Thursday night? Who oversaw that? Who felt that it was acceptable to put out such a wishy-washy statement after what Will Horton said? Because, Will Horton's head is now rolled, and he's retired, so, whatever. But he has been publicly embarrassed.
So you're suggesting there could be more casualties inside the bunker at headquarters?
No, I'm not saying that. I do think that Stephen Mead has to be under a bit of pressure, though, for the stuff-ups of the last few weeks. But I just wonder who, in terms of media management, allowed that statement to go through, and did they think it would be swept under the carpet, or was it just a stuff-up?
All right.
Yeah, well, what's happened in the last 2 days, Bruce, and we'll talk about Michael's presser and some of the Carlton comments we've heard during the week and what they've privately been telling people during the week, but... The AFL received late on Thursday, Carlton's assessment, or I suppose overall review and summation of what took place. That will be reviewed in turn by Laura Kane and her medical team. My understanding is that over Monday and Tuesday, Carlton are expected to receive a few more questions back from the AFL regarding their explanation of events. Late on Friday, the AFL Players Association wanted to have a look at this too, and they also received Carlton's findings, Carlton's explanation of the procedural situation that saw Elijah Hollands stay on the ground for more than 60% of game time, and well after half-time, of course, despite what people could see was going on. The players too, I think, will have questions. They are going to review Carlton's findings over the weekend. So I think the AFL and the AFL Players Association are not working together, but they're working in tandem, if you will, to review what has taken place at Carlton. We also found out last week from Tom Morris on the agenda setters that the AFL and the PA have finally put forward some findings and reviews after the Christian Petrarca situation on the King's birthday, which is 2 years ago. It's taken way too long for this to happen, but we've finally got a couple of outcomes, or certainly some recommendations, including the potential for an independent medical or psychological, whatever, watchdog at every game to be the person in charge and the final overseer of decisions, not only like the ARC is with concussion, but actually at the ground. There will also be a redefinition of match day roles, potentially before games, which I think is really interesting because we know what happened with Christian Petrarca. There's a theory that even the hospital misdiagnosed him initially, so no one was really, there's not one person to blame, but certainly in the case of Elijah Holland, the fact that it's also been investigated, as we revealed this time last week by WorkSafe, there's a lot more to play out here.
Lee, how did you rate Vossi's press conference? You've given 1,000 press conferences in your time. He spoke passionately. There's been plenty of people saying that they were so impressed with the passion he spoke with. Did he get the wording completely correct?
Oh, well, I didn't think that. I thought the bullying word was like a bad word in a sense because everyone just concentrates on that word, and I don't think that's appropriate. I mean, but what he did say, or what he was trying to say, or did say, but bullying might have been going a bit too far, is he would say the Carlton operation, their people, their doctors, their psychologists, their coaches, are being disrespected by being questioned. Now, fair enough, you've got to be accountable and they're being questioned, but like for instance, I feel like I know very little about what happened. You know there's a bit of vision that you saw of Ollie Hollands. You knew that he got no Elijah should I say that he got no stats. So that was the critical thing. I even think if he got 6 or 8 touches, I said I don't know whether this would have even popped up, but it was so stark that he didn't touch the ball. But what has happened behind the scenes is impossible to know unless you were behind the scenes. And this having an independent people looking at it, Caro, they'd have to be down the interchange bench. They couldn't be in the arc if you're talking about psychological, mental health type stuff. I mean, so it sounds good in principle, but, okay, you review your processes, and I guarantee every club in the competition has asked themselves the same question over the last week. Well, what if we had a player in what we think this kind of situation is? We're making assumptions that he wasn't fit to be on the field. That might be correct. I'm not sure. That's what I'm saying. We know he played poorly. We know he looked a little bit unusual. That we know by our eyes. Eyes told us that. But actually, was he not in a fit position to be on the field, as in he was going to damage himself or someone else? That to me is a question, not an answer.
Well, this is what we do know. We know that he was struggling during the game because Graham Wright, when he finally fronted the media last Sunday, after a pretty unsatisfactory press release that came out, I think, in the 24 hours after the game, we know that they knew he was struggling.
But struggling is one thing. I mean, if you talk about being anxious and nervous and all that kind of stuff, I mean, the players that play today, at various points of the game, depends where you take this. Are we talking just in a good emotional space, which changes and goes around?
We know they were acutely aware of his history. We know they should be commended for this. They were frustrated and disappointed with him by the end of last year, but they gave him another chance and he came through with flying colours over the off-season. So they're to be commended for that. But we know they were worried about him during the game.
But before you go on to that, but part of that might be we've got to give him a chance to work through this.
And that's what they did, but it was wrong, in my view. And I think we saw enough to make that conclusion, Lee. We saw him do a practice shot for goal and how that worked out before the game. We know that his teammates were not kicking to him. We know what the Collingwood players were saying and noticed during the game and what he was saying to them, whether it was true or not. We know that Michael Voss considered taking him off at halftime, but he wanted to stay on. And we know that they were worried enough to consult a psychologist, a club psychologist who wasn't at the ground during the game. Now, they're at the very least serious red flags. And we know that WorkSafe are having a look as well. And we know that the crowd was so shocked by what they saw that everybody was putting stuff on social media. I'm not saying we trust social media, but all of the above. And just finally, Bruce, where he really missed the mark was to say that a private event has become public. Now, Michael, as Sam McClure told him in the press conference, you played him in front of 75,000 people and 2 million on TV.
That's the quote I had. Rather than make this a private challenge, we've made this a public event. Well, as soon as he walked down the race, it became a public event.
And everybody has respected. Everybody has respected Elijah's privacy this week. Everybody is shadowed for him. And that's the other thing we know, Lee. We know as a result of everything that happened, he went back to hospital.
Yes,
Caro, the latest on the Geelong small forward who is still absent from the club.
Yeah, there have been some more disturbing reports, particularly one in the Herald Sun today, linking an alleged drug issue with Tyson Stengle and extortion. Now, I don't know where that's quite come from. I can sort of imagine. But I think the main issue here is that Tyson Stengle is really adrift at the moment from the Geelong Football Club. There are Geelong leaders hoping to catch up with him this weekend because he is in the Adelaide Environs, and of course Geelong are playing in Adelaide this weekend. Look, the point we made on Agenda Setters on Tuesday night was that there is some regret among Geelong leaders that they felt that Tyson could have been better served had he been able to play 5 or so weeks ago when he was sort of doing okay. But because he was in the AFL medical protocols, he wasn't ready to play under those protocols. So could that have helped him? The protocols are there to help players. They're there to save players from themselves in many instances.
Can you explain that one? Because I heard that term and I didn't know what that term meant. What does being under the AFL medical protocols mean?
Well, I don't want to go into specifics with Tyson, but generally it means that the player has a medical issue. It can be an illicit drug issue. It can be a prescription drug issue. It can be a mental health protocol, but it means that they are deemed not fit to play. But it means that, for example, if you are prone to testing positive to an illicit substance or a performance-enhancing substance, and I'm not saying this about Tyson, I'm saying generally, it protects you and your club and the game and everyone concerned because you're not playing. It might protect the player from being penalised or getting a strike or a fine or whatever.
Would the club somehow put them in the AFL medical protocols, or does the AFL just come in as the...
It's done as
and takes over.
There's a sort of triage involved, but it's a collective effort. Yeah, okay. Collective between the AFL and the club. I mean, I know Chris Scott said people are commenting without knowing, and I don't know much, but they know even less. We do know that Geelong felt that way. We do know that he hasn't been responding to calls, that there's been a falling out with his management, with Anna Scully, I think it is, and the partner of Eddie Betts, who's been a bit of a father figure to Tyson. We know that the AFL's, I suppose, most senior Indigenous player, father figure in Paulie Vandenberg, has struggled to get in touch with Tyson in recent times and has been very close to him. So, and he's also very close with Geelong's player development manager, and I think he's the one who Tyson has been most close to. So, it's a really, really difficult situation.
Just to get on this, but so before he can play, the AFL has to tick that he's ready to play before Geelong decide is he ready to play.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, it's complicated.
Because you've gone into that medical protocol, which is under the new illicit drug situation.
Caro, you briefly
among
mentioned
other things.
That story in the Herald Sun today on page 5, written by Jordan McCarthy, just to flesh that out. Senior footy figures of concerns that Geelong small forward Tyson Stengle could have been targeted in an extortion attempt by criminals based in another state. An industry source has told the Herald Sun that there are serious fears Stengle may be struggling with addiction, and heavies, in inverts, have seized upon this to extort the premiership star.